Welcome to a Legendarium special about how Tudor Monasteries invented the modern world. In this special, we will talk about how monasteries helped to invent mechanical clocks, bell-making techniques, and pioneered the commercial farming that made England rich. Monasteries were the second greatest landowner in England aside from the king, and served as centers of spiritual life. Within their walls, monks devoted themselves to biblical study, prayer, and scholarship. Yet generations of guilt-ridden aristocrats bequeathed the monks vast estates which ensured the monks had the money to stand at the forefront of innovation, technology, and commercial farming. Monastic life centered on the ringing of bells, which called monks to worship 8 times a day every 3 hours, including once in the middle of the night. Thus, timekeeping held great importance. 15th century tower clocks operated by cogwheels pulled by a weight with a device called an escapement to regulate their force. By Tudor times, monasteries began to invent mechanical clocks powered by a device called the foliot, mounted on a staff with 2 pallets upon it. These 2 pallets kept a clock wheel turning at precise times which moved the clock hands. Without the foliot and pallets, the wheels would speed up and stop within a couple of minutes, leaving the monks with no idea when they should show up for services. These clocks could even automatically ring small bells 8 times a day, so monks always knew when to show up for prayers. During the Tudor era, mechanical clocks spread from monasteries to church towers, and for the first time, precise measurements of time became part of daily life. Since you couldn't call monks to prayer without the bells, the monasteries designed their own foundries where they pioneered bell manufacturing techniques. By Tudor times, bell makers in the monasteries created a mold by cutting wooden frames and then pressing a daub made of clay, hair, and sand onto the mold until it made the right shape. Next, the bell maker placed layers of wax upon the daub, followed by a second layer of daub. With that, the bell maker fired the kiln, which hardened the clay daub and melted the wax, which drained away, leaving a bell-shaped cavity within a bell-shaped mold. Finally, the bell maker poured bronze into the mold's cavity, and with a bellows-powered fire that reached 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, the bell maker fired the bronze bell. Yet a single bubble in the molten metal could ruin the bell, so the abbot always blessed the kiln before the bell maker put it to use. After the Wars of the Roses, the monasteries began to commercialize the growing of livestock. Since the monks devoted their time to prayer, believed to win God's favor for England, they hired tenants to work their vast estates. They rented out 5-acre parcels to tenant farmers, usually wealthy peasants with the means to hire teams of laborers. They built houses large enough to house themselves, their families, and 8 to 10 workmen. In a world profoundly shaped by faith, the tenant, his family, and his workmen ate at a long table which resembled an altar. Seated like Christ and his disciples, portrayed in Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, they ate meals together. Though they grew vegetables and grain on their acreage, tenants paid the rent and raised money with livestock. During the Tudor era, pig farming grew from a cottage enterprise into a vast industry. Pigs provided a relatively inexpensive means to make dried and smoked pork for winter. It began when the farmers arranged a date between the boar and the sow. Since a pig's pregnancy took about 3 months, farmers took care to ensure the sow gave birth after winter, for small piglets would probably not survive their first frost. After 3 months, the sow began giving birth to the piglets and then nursing them. After only 10 weeks, the piglets no longer needed milk from their mother, so once the sow stopped producing milk, the farmers lured their piglets into a makeshift fence and took them into the woods to forage for acorns and roots while being watched closely by their human owners. And soon after the piglets stopped nursing, the sow could breed again, so the farmers arranged another date between her and the boar, and the cycle of profit could begin again. By turning farms into pig factories, Tudor farmers jumped from subsistence to commercial farming. Working the land now became a trade that could make you rich. Yet it wasn't only pigs being grown on Tudor monasteries. In part because the church favored 3 fast days a week, monasteries owned vast waterways filled with fish. To catch eels, the Tudors used techniques employed for centuries. Basket makers made eel traps by twisting willow branches into a pair of wooden cones slotted inside one another. Eels, naturally attracted to dark places, swam inside to feast upon a bait made up of rotten fish. Once inside, they became trapped in the spike-filled interior, and eel hunters kept them alive in a damp sack. Fishermen gave a portion of their catch to the monasteries and kept the rest. Beyond farming, some monastic tenants in Derbyshire and Shropshire turned to lead mining for additional income. Malleable and resistant to corrosion, church builders used lead for roofing, guttering, and the manufacturing of stained glass. Farmers turned miners received a lease from the monastery, then crawled into small tunnels and entered chambers which resembled rabbit warrens. They widened enough to push inside a wheelbarrow. They walked hunched over 1,000 feet into the earth, where men on wooden platforms in a vast open space hunted for silver specks in the rock, which marked concentrations of ore deposits. Miners then removed the ore using hammers and chisels, removing the lead without damaging it, which took much skill and labor. Since the ore veins ran at 45-degree angles, work tended to be hard. Whole families worked in the mines, facing danger from inhaling lead dust and cave-ins. Children loaded up pieces of lead into the wheelbarrows and pushed them to the surface. After they brought the lead up, smelters heated the coal to 600 degrees Fahrenheit using hilltop furnaces powered by kiln-dried oak called white coal. By such means, England produced 500 tons of lead each year. Yet this back-breaking work could pay. Those who mined lead during the summer could earn enough to buy 80 sheep in a single season, which meant the difference between poverty and prosperity. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.